Welcome to today's session of AI 101, where we explore how AI is transforming translation in practical and impactful ways. I'm your host, Bryan Murphy, CEO of Smartling, and I'm excited to be joined by Alex Yanishevsky, Senior Director of AI Solutions at Smartling. First things first, let's hear a little bit more about Alex. Alex, a localization industry veteran, is Senior Director of AI MT Solutions at Smartling. His areas of expertise include AI, NLP, MT, TMS, and CAT tools. Alex serves as VP of AMTA. He writes articles for industry journals such as Multilingual and presents at industry conferences such as Gala, Lokeworld, Taos, and AMTA. In addition, Alex is an adjunct professor at TLOC, University of Strasbourg, teaching on Introduction to NLP class and University of Washington co-teaching courses on localization engineering. Alex holds a PhD in Slavic languages and literature from Brown University. Today, we're going to demystify what AI really means for translation teams beyond the buzzwords and explore how organizations can adopt AI tools to drive efficiency without sacrificing quality or introducing risk. Whether you're just starting your AI journey or looking to refine your strategy, this conversation will give you clarity, confidence, and actionable insights. Alex, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those right into the chat. So, Alex, let's start at the beginning. What are you hearing about using AI in translation these days?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about this topic. It's something that I feel very passionate about. I'll give you kind of a short answer and a long answer. I mean, the short answer about what's driving use of AI is efficiency, scalability, reliability, lower cost, right? But I kind of want to back up for a moment to talk about how we got to now, which I think is very, very exciting, right? Because even before we had ChatGPT, right, and it kind of captured everyone's attention that, wow, we can actually do this in a way that is reliable and scalable, right? The way we got here, and I liken the journey of a large language model and AI to the growing up of a human being, right? So before ChatGPT, we had like GPT-1 and GPT-2, and those were baby steps, and you could get it to do absolutely ridiculous things. Like you could do adversarial attacks and say, hey, GPT, tell me how to make a sandwich with glass. And it actually would, right? And it didn't have those guardrails to stop you, right? As we got into ChatGPT, you began to see that less and less. And I would say where we are right now is kind of like equivalent to a young adult of large language models, right? And I think that's why we're talking about them today, because we're seeing that they're a lot more mature, they're a lot more reliable, they're a lot more scalable. They're giving us the answers that we want. We can automate things, right? And now we're kind of beginning, as they become more accepted, we're really talking now about the next level. Okay, we've accepted this, but how can it do better, right? What are the steps to do to make them automate even more, to make them even more reliable, to make them even more cost efficient?
Sounds great. Yeah, I think if you read the news, and certainly within many of the organizations and customers that we deal with, there's a lot of pressure to use AI. So I think probably the number one question that folks have is, so Alex, how can I use AI translation to improve efficiency? Where are we seeing customers having success?
So I would say where we're seeing customers have the best success is in what we would call pre-processing and post-processing of translation, right? There is the use case of translation too. Hey, can I use large language models? Can I use AI to translate, right? And we're going to cover that a little bit more also as we're talking, but really we find kind of the best bang for your buck where you're getting the most value is in this pre-processing and post-processing stages.
Got it. Can you give me an example of like what pre-processing might entail, or what output I should expect or outcome and post? What do those look like in our world?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about both of them. So when we're talking about pre-processing, right, we're talking about things like using client-specific linguistic assets to get an even higher quality, right? So things that we call adaptive machine translation. In other words, let's say we have the sentences in our platform of everything that you as a client has ever done, right? Now we need to translate new stuff, right? You have a new release, version 2, for example, right? Rather than just taking what's in the database, because you've changed things a little bit, what we can do is we can take those assets and we can have the large language model make them even better for us, even give us a better, higher quality. That's kind of the pre-processing phase. The post-processing phase, I think, is very, very cool because there's a lot of control that we have. So we can do things like use a client style guide, right? So again, let's say that same example, you're a client, you have your linguistic assets, you have your glossaries, you have all your translations. What we could do is we have tools that will have large language models essentially write a style guide for us, right? And that style guide is going to be profoundly, profoundly different because imagine you're Disney versus TD Bank, right? If you're TD Bank and your style guide is going to be a little bit more buttoned up, you want to give people the confidence, the security to invest their money with you, right? That's a completely different market acquisition, client acquisition than Disney, who might say, hey, we want families to come to Orlando and go on a family cruise, right? That's going to be a more casual, playful, have fun tone, right? All of that is captured in the style guide. And what's nice is we can actually summarize that style guide from your linguistic assets, and we're able to get large language models to actually do this, to actually push your machine translation one way or the other, taking into account your company persona and your audience persona. So we can actually do this now at scale, which is very, very exciting.
Sure. And let's take an example here a step further. So, I can get that from my legacy translation provider today. What sort of outcome should I expect? What difference should I expect having this done with AI or AI human in the loop?
So I agree with you. Yeah, you could certainly do this with a full human in the loop and with your traditional process. But what's going to happen is you're going to be spending significantly larger amounts of money, and the turnaround time is going to be dramatically different, right? So by actually using LLM as intrinsically as part of our process, what we're doing is we're doing high quality brand translation at a fraction of the cost and at a fraction of the turnaround time, right? So we're basically allowing you to do the same, but translate 8 times as much for the same budget, right? And one other thing I want to mention is one of the great uses of large language models, machine translation coupled with large language models, is this concept of liberating your content, right? Let's say you're a director of marketing and you need to translate more high-end content. That's where this workflow of large language models and machine translation will do things much faster. But you might also have content like knowledge bases forums, which you simply don't have the budget to do, right? So this no human in the loop, very, very high quality translation with LLMs allows you to do that too, right? So you're liberating content that before would have just stayed in one language, say English, rather than making it actionable for a bunch of other markets.
Yeah, we hear this all the time from marketing departments at our customers and product engineering teams where the translation process is too expensive, too slow, and they ration content. So this feels like a big a game changer for those types of companies where they can really unlock brand specific high quality translation at a fraction of the cost and speed. So that's pretty exciting. That's a really amazing outcome. I've heard that AI hallucinates. Is that a solvable problem? Is that true?
Yes, AI does hallucinate, but it hallucinates a lot less. And we have tools to actually detect that. So there are two ways that we're solving this problem, right? So I like to compare large language models. I'd like to compare LLMs to a really, really gifted young child, right? So imagine you have an 8-year-old, your 8-year-old gets straight A's. They get high marks in school. They're way, way above their grade level. Like they could essentially be doing high school work, right?
Yes, I
But
would, I would definitely have to. I would definitely have to imagine that. Yes, but go on.
but by the same token, right, you'd probably say, well, okay, even though they might do that, you might have a child who gets these straight A's. They're not necessarily going to have the emotional IQ of a 16-year-old at 8 years old, right? So essentially, you're not going to give the keys to your car, to a nice car at that, to an 8-year-old, I imagine, right? And that's kind of how I look at large language models. They can do absolutely amazing stuff, but if we just completely give them the keys to the car, they can do things that are silly, right? They can hallucinate at times. And what we're seeing is providers themselves, LLM providers, are much better at catching those hallucinations. We also do quite a lot on our side. We have lots of tools, lots of algorithms and logic to catch such silliness when it goes off the rails, right? So we can actually look at a sentence, and in fact, this happens anytime in any of our workflows where we use a large language model. We don't trust what we get from it. We get it back. We actually have a set of tools to check whether it changed something and whether it changed something way, way from what we gave it in the original. And if it doesn't meet a certain threshold, we'll actually back out and say, no, LLM, we don't trust you on this. We're going to go to the next step of the process, right? And what I'd add to this is, if we're talking about mission critical content, right? For example, highly regulated industries, financial, medical, you definitely want to have a human in the loop.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Trust, but verify, right? And I think we
Exactly.
hear this in a lot of other practices out there. Engineering is famously adopting AI to help them code, but I don't know anyone that releases code straight to production without some sort of review step, and similar with many content producers. So I think that sounds like what you're focused on right now is developing tools, algorithms and logic to catch issues as much as possible, and then when it's mission critical, making sure that there's a human in the loop to ensure that very, very high quality. That makes a lot of sense to me. So, how if we think about how advanced is AI currently when it comes to translation? Where do traditional methods like machine translation perform better, or do they?
So this is very interesting because it's an ever evolving field. So up till now, up until the time we had large language models, right? Most people probably know of Google Translate, and Google Translate was built on neural machine translation technology, right? In essence, it's supposed to mimic kind of like the way neural networks work in your brain. And it works very, very well. Even now, it still continues to work very, very well. What we found in our research, and there's kind of a split here. If we want something that adheres to more strict content, to more brand terminology. So, for example, for something like online documentation, neural machine translation that's actually been trained is doing even better than large language models, right? At least where we stand today. I think maybe in the next year or so that it'll change, but right now that's where we are. Where we see large language models do very, very well is for more natural content, more content that's supposed to sound fluent. So if you think of something like marketing versus online documentation and support, the latter could still be done by trained neural machine translations, and they're still running the table on this. But when we're talking about more emotional engagement marketing, that's where large language models do quite well.
That makes sense. What I've often heard is that neural machine translation is quite good for accurate translations. Uh, Large language models tend to be better at producing more brand specific, fluent, and culturally adaptive translations. Is that a too simple, or is that an accurate statement?
No, I think that's very much an accurate statement that LLMs kind of give you this control. They're inherently more fluent and they give you control to be even more fluent. I think what's nice about our platform is that we really don't take sides. We're agnostic because I think fundamentally, I feel that our remit, what we're supposed to do as a technology provider, is to create the best first pass translation, right?
Yeah.
Now, whether that's through trained neural machine translation, smoothed out or further normalized by large language models, or purely by large language models in the case of more fluent marketing content, our goal ultimately is to give our clients the best first pass machine translation, right? And then for regulated content or mission critical content to have a human in the loop, right? So I put more focus on the technology that allows us to do this.
Yeah, and I know that you and your team are paying an awful lot of attention to this, and you're benchmarking results from neural machine translation, large language models, and combined with prompt engineering, I think on a monthly basis across all of the major neural machine translation engines and the major LLMs.
We're doing this every month, and because it seems like you basically wake up almost every week now and there's a new large language model, there's an improvement, either a new provider or an improvement to an existing model. So I think it's very, very important for us to really stay on top of this so we could best consult with clients on what their scenario is. One other thing I want to mention, how we use large language models, and this is kind of an offshoot of getting to the best translation, is sure, we smooth output that gives you a lot of control, gives you the best machine translation output, but we're also doing quite a lot of work on both LQE, linguistic quality estimation, and LQA, which is linguistic quality assurance. So the idea here is we want to tell you for estimation, we want to give you a sense of how good this translation is, right? And if this translation is very good, you might even be able to skip it and not have a human in the loop for those sentences or even potentially those files. And what's nice about the LQA, the linguistic quality assurance component, is rather than just randomly choosing 10%, 5% to have someone look at it, look at a sample, we can actually be very, very targeted, which I think is cool because if you're a client, we can actually say, hey, these are more likely to have issues. Let's be smart in our LQA efforts and only check those, right? And large language models are enabling us to do this at scale, which is phenomenal. It's something that hasn't been done in the industry before.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's really key. As companies are able to translate so much more content, right? Those processes need to be automated, and with the increase in content, especially that's not done by a human, you've got to have an automated quality assurance process at the end of that, so that you have trust in what you've produced.
Yeah, and I would, one thing I'd add to this is I think we've really come closer than I would say to most in solving this. And I think part of the reason is because we're fairly conservative and fairly rigorous how we approach this. And what I mean by that is we feel a great responsibility that if we're going to call something high quality and potentially skippable, we actually have a very, very long set of rules that have to be passed, certain thresholds that have to be passed in order to call something good.
Well, I think, and this is one of the advantages that we have because we actually translate ourselves billions of words. So we're dog fooding to the nth degree, and when we guarantee the quality of those translations, they've got to be right. So it's been a really interesting experience, I know, for the team for the past 24, 36 months. Talk to me a little bit about what are some of the advantages of adopting AI into the translation process?
Yeah, so I think this is a big change which we haven't had before, right? So previously, until AI came on the scene, we would get our translation and that's it. We'd be stuck with it. There were very few levers that we could pull, right? So imagine your kind of proverbial Google Translate. You get a machine translation back from Google Translate. You don't like it. There's not much you can do. I mean, you could write to Google and say, hey, I really don't like it. Can you change it? And you'll get prioritized somewhere in the list. You don't know when and where it'll be fixed, right? What's really, really awesome about AI is that now we can actually have prompts that allow us to control the style and tone of translations, right? So what I mean by that is we can actually get under the hood a little bit more and start controlling what we want. So if we see a machine translation output and we don't like it, we can say, hey, can you make this formal? Can you make this more informal? Can you make this more casual? Can you add this? Can you add that? Can you rephrase it? And we can actually do that on the source side too before we even translate, right? You could say, can you simplify this so it'll be much easier to understand? That's not anything that we could have done before. And I think this is having really, really profound implications, right? So the ability to tie all of this together as we currently have in our platform is ultimately getting us to that best first quality translation and really letting us bridge that last mile for the translator. But I think that's a really, really big deal.
Yeah, that's pretty wild when you think about it for a moment. Up until now, if you wanted to do exactly what you just described, you would have to probably talk to, if you were translating 50 languages, potentially up to 50 different linguists and talk to them about, hey, I want the tone or style or glossary insertion or something like that to be changed. Like that would be a very lengthy and expensive process. Now we're baking that right into the technology itself, and our customers are able to have a very fine control over the translations that they're producing in a very highly automated way.
Exactly, exactly. I think that's the biggest game changer.
That's amazing. That's really interesting. Um, what are some of, so I hear there's a lot of conversations around it. I know that there's a lot of pressure from CEOs, et cetera, to implement AI in not only translation departments, but in engineering and marketing and sales, et cetera. And so a number of our customers are trying to experiment with implementing AI yourself. So what are some of the challenges of DIY AI, so to speak?
Yeah, so the example that I kind of want to use here is if you think of a sport that's become really popular, certainly in the US and probably little by little worldwide too, right? If you think of something like pickleball, right? It's a sport that's fairly easy to pick up. Most people are fairly athletic. They have, a certain amount of hand-to-eye coordination, could go to a store, buy a couple of paddles, get out onto the court and start playing, right? And feel like you're getting some exercise. It's fun, right? But if you really want to take it to the next level, if you want to get good at it, you're going to have to start, if you want to start playing tournaments, right? You're going to have to start doing drills. You're going to have to start watching videos about strategy, right? You're going to have to practice. And I think investing in AI and implementing AI is kind of the same thing. It seems like it's very, very easy because, hey, I could write a prompt in my language. I could throw a couple of examples in and I immediately get feedback, right? So you feel like you've accomplished something. But as you start doing this at scale, you might realize that, okay, I might have expertise for my language, but as you said in your example, I've got to do this in 50 languages. Do I really have the expertise in all of them? Do I really have the machine learning skills, right? Am I a data scientist? Am I a learning engineer? Am I a computational linguist to understand all of this, right? So that's where I think DIY begins to break down a little bit, right? And that's where typically you'd want to engage with a partner that has expertise, that has a R&D arm that's looking into this, on a monthly basis, benchmarking and kind of guide you to the best solution, right? There's a whole separate conversation I think we'll have as well about the costs involved in doing DIY too.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that there is this notion that AI is free, and certainly in our experience, it's certainly not when you start adding up all the tokens. I have some advice here to folks where if they're getting pressure from their CEO or maybe their engineering team to switch out and just use AI. Yeah, I think you reverse that. So if your CEO is saying, "Hey, get rid of all the translation infrastructure you have and just integrate with an API to GPT," you could say, "Hey, that sounds fine. Great news. I actually just built an AI application here to create and present your board meeting presentations for you. You'll just use that, right?" Sorry.
Yeah,
So,
I imagine that'll go over very well, right? And if you
right.
haven't checked any hallucinations as well, because you haven't built that, that could be a bit problematic.
Yeah, that's right. Well, listen, CEOs are known to hallucinate anyway. So, anyways, yeah, I do think it's remarkable. It's like I don't know if it's that much different than like when Google Translate came around, right? Machine translation. Everybody's like, "Oh, this is great. We can integrate with an API and it'll work magically." And as we know that translation is an incredibly complex workflow across organizations, but we do think we are excited about. I think we're all very excited about its potential for doing the work that we described. Um, Tell me a little bit about how, I think switching gears here to people, right? At the end of the day, we're all people. We're all trying to get ahead in our careers. How can AI or implementing AI in translation impact your career positively? What seems to work well? What might not go as well?
Yeah, so here I guess I would differentiate between companies that are AI first companies and AI everywhere companies. And I think there's a profound difference here, right? In the case of AI everywhere, it's typically a mandate that comes from the leadership or executive team where employees are told, hey, use AI no matter what, whether it fits, whether it doesn't fit, just use it, right? And I think that leads to lots of problems. It leads to cost overruns. It leads to using AI for cases that it really was never meant for. What I would suggest people do, and I think, I'm actually proud of the fact that this is how we run our group, and I certainly see that as a bigger picture in our entire company, is I would consider ourselves an AI first company. And what I mean by that, and here's where it gets into furthering your career. If there's a task that I have, I first and foremost try to be judicious about it and ask myself, is it a task that can be solved with existing technology, or do I need to use AI for it, right? So I kind of, as another comparison, think of something like if you buy a diamond, right? A diamond has the properties of cutting glass, right? But you're really not going to go buy a diamond to start cutting glass to put into your window panes, right? And that's how I would look at AI. I have to do a task. If I'm doing something right now that's doing very, very well and is very accurate without AI, why should I spend the extra money on it, right? If AI is not going to do it any better. However, if there are tasks like summarization, if there are tasks like writing code, if there are tasks like correcting translation, yeah, I would want to jump in. I would want to start writing prompts to see how I could make things a lot more efficient. I think that's where people can really make a big difference in their career, understanding how to make their tasks more efficient so they could do more.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think about this a lot, I think about implementing AI in our company, product first, right? That's really where we started. That's to help our customers meet their needs in terms of quality, cost, speed, user experience, right? And we're making great strides there. I also think a lot about implementing AI functionally within each department to improve our efficiency. And it's really something that I'm mandating, right? I'm asking every department to come forward with what's your strategy to implement change using AI? How are you going to improve productivity? And to me, the folks that can get their heads around that and achieve success or have an impact are super valuable to me. I look at it less as I'm not asking them to go out and invent their own AI solution, right? But what I'm asking them to do is go out and find fit for purpose AI tools that can get the job done. That's what I'm interested in. It's not about just like, hey, just use AI to AI. I'm asking them, have an impact on your business, get your job done more efficiently with a successful solution. And I think that those people within an organization become very, very valuable, or considerably more valuable, and will become more valuable over the next several years. So I always say one of our jobs is to help our customers get promoted. I think we're quite focused on that, to helping our customers understand the best ways to have success with AI in their departments. So kind of going along that line, how should companies think about testing and adopting AI into their translation program?
So I'd say here, right, because it can get to be very overwhelming if you try to solve everything, right? Because with AI, the promise is that we could write a prompt to do virtually everything, right? But I would kind of, look at first and foremost, what is the problem that you're trying to solve and what are your KPIs, right? If you have a set of problems, can you prioritize what they are, attach a dollar value to it, attach a timeline to it, and try to solve those first, right? And those might be things like, is it reducing turnaround time? Is it improving quality? Is it translating more while reducing costs? But I think it's really, really important to first understand what your goals are and then articulate them to your stakeholders and partners, right? You might want to, just as an example, maybe you want to start out with content types that have lower risk, maybe something like knowledge bases, right? Or technical documentation versus marketing pieces that are much higher emotional response content, right? And build from there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And even within organizations, I'm sure if we think about reducing turnaround time, improving quality, translating more, reducing costs. I'm sure there's different use cases even within an organization. So I think then breaking that down and then adopting the right strategy to that content type makes a lot of sense. And I think it makes a lot of sense if you're just beginning, kind of crawl, walk, run. Start with something that's a little bit lower risk. Start building up your linguistic assets, your capabilities, and advance from there. And I think also then it's also very important to understand your options, right? What are your capabilities as a team and an organization? What are your vendors' capabilities? What's your budget, et cetera? And then building from there. So I think that's really helpful. If as we wrap this thing up here, in closing, if you could give one piece of advice to companies considering adding AI, or maybe even those nervous to do so, what would it be?
I would say that look for a trusted advisor, right? Though I would say though you might be tempted to do DIY, kind of that, pickleball example that I proved, just for yourself to kind of, get your hands wet, right? That's totally fine. But ultimately, I'd say if you consider doing this at scale, consider the amount of people and the expertise involved in doing this properly, right? The time you would probably need a team of at least 4 or 5 people, a machine learning engineer, a data scientist, a computational linguist. You'd probably need a linguist for every single language who would tell you whether something is done properly or not, right? So all of those, that begins to add up, right? So it's also an ever-changing technology, right? You'd probably need someone doing research as well, right? So for example, right now, there's a lot of research that's being done for purpose-built small language models, right? So the thing that I'm trying to get across here is that you'd really need a dedicated team for research, for deployment and maintenance, and that's not a trivial task, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that you really want to consider before you completely jump fully in the water with DIY.
Yeah, trust me, I have to approve the budget every quarter. So, yeah, it's remarkable. This is, it may, I've been doing this for over 20 years and seen the various flavors of technology, kind of curves of emerging. This is one of the fastest moving, also one of the most impactful. It is not a mature technology at this point. It is evolving, to your point, every month. So we have a full-time job in this company and in your R&D department, staying on top of it, maximizing customer benefit. It is as you say, a non-trivial task. Um, I think, one of the things we commonly do with new technology is to overestimate its capabilities and underestimate the cost and effort required to make it work. So I've seen that time and time again as I've been through a few of these cycles before. Well, Alex, thank you so much for sharing such clear, practical insights on how AI is shaping the future of translation. I think you've helped cut through a lot of the noise and given our customers a solid understanding of where AI can drive real value and where it's important to proceed thoughtfully. And for those of you tuning in, we hope this conversation helps you as you look to explore or scale AI within your translation programs. And if you'd like to learn more, check out Smartling's resources at smartling.com or feel free to connect with Alex or myself on LinkedIn. Once again, thank you for listening and stay tuned for our next session where we'll continue exploring how AI is transforming global content and localization strategies.